and we got with us, Tim. Let's bring in the troops.
Sure, definitely. And by the way, apparently the LinkedIn feed did start. We got some feedback.
Huzzah. Okay.
So let's see, Mark, it's been, I guess, a couple months since you've been on here. And I think the last time before you were on, you were trying to watch the ball drop and you were screaming at the Elmo box.
Drop, but this was our first year. I have recently 2-year-old twins, and we were trying to do a little New Year's Eve for the kids at 9 p.m. and it just wasn't happening for us. And the funny thing is, I was live streaming the ball drop for EarthCam at the time, so I could, but otherwise things are great. And we've been working on lots of fun stuff. We're working with IMAX now on some interesting stuff, and I'm deeply buried with a project coming up with Billboard that's going to be fun. So we've got some actual boots on the ground production happening, which is always nice after years of doing lots of virtual and hybrid events. I enjoy being in a production truck.
Well, and the beauty is, as it goes in California, it goes in the rest of the country. So hopefully we'll see sort of live production boots on the ground come back across the board. So
yeah, I think so. I think once we're over the Omicron, surge, the tail of that, hopefully it's the tail of it. I think we're, it's maybe a bold prediction, but I think we're done. I think we're done with the plexiglass dividers in production trucks. I think we're done with the the double masking at catering. I think we're done, that type of thing. So fingers crossed.
Before I go on to Eric, it's funny you mentioned the plexiglass, because of course with the research we do with old technology, we're trying to wrap it in plexiglass as we send it to India and Africa. The price of plexiglass shot up dramatically during COVID. And so one of the things we've put on our wish list when people say, what can we do to help your charity, is give us pieces of plexiglass when you're done with all this. So
I'll bear that in mind. Every production truck company in the world have invested heavily in plexiglass a couple of years ago, and they're all getting rid of it now. So
good. Well, yeah, if you see somebody getting rid of it, send them my way, and I'll definitely try to help figure out how to good use. Eric, how's life up in Wisconsin, and what are you up to these days?
Well, Mark, I learned after the 5th or 6th Streaming Media Connect virtual event to never say never. So I'm hoping you're right, but we just did a virtual streaming, we're doing a Streaming Media Connect in a couple of weeks. And then we're working on planning Streaming Media East for Boston in May. And also the Content Delivery Summit will be in Boston in May. And that actually is going to be a hybrid event, or at least a partially hybrid event. And that's not so much because we're hedging our bets, but because the event that Dom Robinson has built over the last couple of years has become a very international one. And since it will be starting at 9 a.m. US time, we want to make sure that our international attendees, at least the ones in England and Europe, are able to view that online. And I should probably take this opportunity to mention that Mark DeJong, who has been helping with Content Delivery Summit since Dom took over, will actually be taking over Content Delivery Summit. As Dom mentioned, Dom, you said you've got so much going on with Greening of Streaming and with ideas that it was sort of time. It kind of feels good, doesn't it, to build an event and then hand it over to someone else.
Time to let it go on a high, really, rather than run myself ragged this year and not do both things well. So no, it's really nice, and Mark was just the right person with the CDN Alliance kicking off in the background. It's just the right person in the industry, I think, to take the show forward from here. So I'm really delighted.
Yeah, the timing was really perfect.
We'll come back around to the topic of hybrid events in a few minutes, because I think that's key. But kudos to Information Today and Streaming Media for understanding that that's going to be with us even with COVID ending potentially, because of the fact that we are now so used to internationally being able to have those conversations via Zoom as part of Content Delivery Summit, etc.
Yeah.
But first,
can I just sorry, I'm just going to chip in technical one. LinkedIn Live has carked things, so the YouTube stream is stuttering a little bit, and I'm going to create a new URL. But if you stay tuned on SMAF, The URL will update in a second, so stay tuned if you're getting a jittery stream.
You say that. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
so
well,
I'm
we
going to
hope
go
so.
to I'm going to go to our two guests. Jill, we'll start with you. Just introduce yourself.
Jill P. We don't need to try to do the last name. I was in telecom and media for about 30 years, and I just recently started my own business advising executives and sort of working at the working level. I'm kind of an efficiency freak, so making things more efficient.
Good, nice. Cheaper by the dozen meets streaming media, right?
That's right.
Good. And then Xavier in London.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Xavier. I work for Broadpeak today. My background is very much video delivery. Been in this industry for more than 15 years now. Used to build triple play networks at the beginning, doing IPTV and those sort of things, and then slowly evolved into CDN. Worked for companies like Akamai, Alcatel, Nokia, and now Broadpeak. So still very much centered to how we deliver video in the best possible way. And yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation today.
Yeah, good. And are you able to work from the office now, or are you still working from home?
No, he's still working from home. Yeah,
okay,
still working from home, and it's going to be like this for another couple of months. If we're lucky, we'll get to some trade shows, but it's still mostly home based at this point. Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, so Jill, let's talk real quick about one of the topics that you and I had talked about before we went on the air. Sort of what it feels like for the end user. Trying to choose between all the different options they have from a content standpoint.
Yeah, 30 years worth of delivering technology change to users, you learn a lot about what they're willing to accept and not accept. And of course, in corporate America, you have teams to support you when you're rolling change out. But that's not the case for at-home viewers. My husband and I were early cord cutters, and we use every OTT device there is so that we could frustrate ourselves as soon as possible. And, I think things have gotten really complex for a normal user at home. You've got everything that you need to do in order to stream. And then once you finally get into stream, there's so many different applications. It's hard to remember where you were and where it is, in addition to live versus recorded streaming. So it's going to be some period of time for the at-home viewer to really understand. And of course, things will collapse over time and it'll get a little bit easier. But right now, it's really frustrating for most people, and they're always phoning a friend because they don't know exactly where to go when something goes wrong.
And do you see that the average person sort of, if they figure one streaming app out, will sort of stick with that as opposed to, because I know when I look at my Apple TV at home, the girls have Disney Plus, there's YouTube, there's Hulu, etc. And you have to remember the interfaces are different when you go into each one of them to try to search and like that. Do we find consumers, if the app itself doesn't make it easy for them, sort of backing off of a service, or what have you seen?
I think content drives it more than anything else, right? And you have to remember that the community of humans that stream are always trying to share information like, did you watch such and such? Well, where is it? Well, it's on Hulu or it's on Disney Plus, right? Oh, I don't use that streaming device. So it's more about the content than about getting into the actual OTT device or streaming platform. But once you get in there, there's one streaming platform in particular I cannot stand, the UI. And every time I go in there, I'm like, oh, just so unintuitive, right? And I think the other thing that the streaming platforms need to remember is when you're making a change, you can't assume that your at-home users intuitively know what that change is going to do. There was a change made by one of the live streaming providers recently, and I got in and I was just, there's two changes they made, and I'm like, why? Why? And you didn't tell anybody. Now, I eventually figured out what buttons to push and where to go. But in my mind, I'm like, oh, there's millions of people that have no idea and their thing is broken. Their little buttons are broken. So.
Well, I think it's even true with the operating system level, say for a mobile device. One thing Apple's been really good at is consistent experience across multiple devices. I work with a lot of old technology, and people will hand me an iOS 11 device, and I have to remember that certain apps in that don't do what the iOS 15 devices do as well.
The biggest frustration
You say that because I try to, when I talk to consumers, I try to tell them, think of your TV now as your mobile phone, right? You have to go into different things on your mobile phone to do your, and we're used to that at this point. But your TV is really kind of functioning in the same way with all the different apps that you need to download. People don't really understand that. If you think of it as a mobile device on your TV, it's a little bit easier to understand.
Eric,
Sorry, I was just going to chime in that the biggest frustration for me when it comes to user interfaces is not so much finding content, it's that every service and platform treats fast forward and rewind slightly differently. And so I will press a button expecting to rewind, and I will find myself back on the menu screen. If I had one wish for the OTT services, it would be to standardize on fast forward and rewind.
I agree.
Well, and even skipping ads, like if I pick up an Apple TV remote and watch YouTube, skipping ads is different than if I click another button and do in video links and that kind of thing. So Xavier, we talked before the top of the hour about the whole op apps world and HBB TV and ATSC 3.0 and connected TVs. What's your take on it in terms of, A, user interface, B, updating apps on some of these connected TVs?
Yeah, it's a big topic, right? And what is interesting is we obviously went from this world where you would buy your TV service from your operator that would aggregate everything to the OTT world where you can pick and choose. It's more of an app world, right? So probably more flexibility, but as Jill was saying, there's more complexity also associated with it, right? So it is a really interesting battle now. And what we started to see is this battle to be able to get access to the consumer, right? Sometimes people talk about the battle for HDMI 1, right? How do I make sure that, I am the first box, connected to the TV, right? So if it's, a Fire TV, an Android TV or whatever, that gives me more access to the customer. And I think this is very much the trend, right? I think we're going to see more and more of this idea that, one system will have to reaggregate. And recently I had a very interesting conversation here with, a customer. They were telling me about HDMI 0. I'm like, okay, what is HDMI 0? Well, this is the idea similar to Sky with a Sky Glass of, even providing the television. So if I provide you the television with all the apps, then I reaggregate the experience, then I own the customer and I make it easier to steer a customer towards my content. So, I think it's quite a transition as we are now. We're going to see, more changes, but right now it is a little bit messy on the customer side. I think Jill has a good point here.
And I'm going to put in a plug, the secure broadcasted streaming workflows webinar, which we're doing in about an hour and a half. We actually asked the industry to tell us what operating system they felt would be dominant for smart TVs or connected TVs. And it's really interesting that even across the industry, people can't agree. Some said Huawei, some said Samsung, some said Android TV, others said Android operators version, the service platform, AOSP.
Yep, AOSP,
yeah. And so even between knowing what content to deliver, know what codec to use, knowing what app to use and what app on what smart TV platform, it is like your cell phone, but it's like you have 3 different cell phones. Like when I go around the lab here and I pick up an Android device, and then I pick up another Android device and I pick up an iOS device, I have to really reset my mind on each one of them on how I connect to something.
Yeah, it's a bit like where mobile phones were, sorry, Jill, sort of 15 years ago, right? Very fragmented, very, different vendors. And then they basically collapse into 2 or 3 main manufacturers, exit Nokia, exit BlackBerry. It becomes a lot simpler. So I think we're sort of there, it's still very diverse and hopefully it will reconverge, right?
I was just going to say, I coach people at home to pick an OTT device, whether it's your Apple TV or Fire Stick or whatever, versus using a smart TV function, because to your point, every room you go into, every TV is going to have a different remote. You're going to take a minute to look at that remote and remember what buttons you need to push. If you have that one device in each room in your house, you at least are looking at the same remote every time, and you stand a chance of being successful, though you have to log into each one independently, which is an annoyance that I'm sure they'll fix someday.
Well, and I'll add to that, I got married at the beginning of COVID. And as we got married, one thing I did is I started buying old Apple TVs to put on every TV in the house, because my wife and her late husband had 2 young girls and they wanted to see pictures on the TV. So what we decided to do was basically use the Photos app on the Mac to then display those pictures. And so the pictures now show up on every TV in the house. But because some of those Apple TVs are now 5 or 6 years old, the apps no longer function on those. And that's a question for you. So you get a consumer at home, it's working perfectly. They have a version of the Fire Stick that suddenly gets deprecated. Is that a frustration from a consumer standpoint?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The same thing is true for TVs though, right? I'm exercising one day, tried to go on Amazon, won't happen. Call down expert support, my husband, and he reads that TV model no longer, Amazon's not supporting that model anymore. We literally just had our Samsung that we had to upgrade because it wasn't accepting the sound bar. So whether it's an OTT device or your television, it's all the same thing, right? At some point, just like with any technology, they can't keep supporting that technology forever, just like cars, right? You don't make car parts forever. At some point, you have to say, we're not making this car part anymore, and we're moving on from it.
But car parts last 20 years, and it seems like connected TVs last about 18 months.
It's so true. It's so true. And sometimes they do it on purpose, right? To make you go to the next model. So it's a little shady.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's see. Another topic, Dom, we'd had is you said you wanted to talk briefly about some BBC research and development that you did here recently.
Oh, yeah.
Talk a little bit about Ben Schwartz, who'd been on a couple months ago.
Yeah, so those who were tuned in, I think it was the November edition or maybe the December edition, Ben Schwartz was on, and we were trying to wire up a surround sound experiment he'd done with an orchestra, like a spatial audio thing. And I think we couldn't get the audio through the Zoom channel into SMAF, unfortunately. But interestingly, I was asked to come and help with a gig a friend of mine who works at BBC R&D was doing, with a full sort of 360 VR 8-camera system. I can't remember all the kit name. And a full spatial audio. And it was interesting that we got the stream live. We had to basically bounce it through Facebook because there were the only people supporting the full combination of 360 video and audio that was just freely available. I'm sure it's commercially available elsewhere. And we had a 16-piece sort of improvised jazz orchestra sat all the way around this camera. That was great. It was actually I haven't got the most attuned eyes or ears, but it was quite amazing being able to just scan around and really get a sense of this of turning your head in this orchestra and so on. So it was a good project. Nice. They streamed it they streamed it at 8K live offsite.
That was exactly what I was going to ask, because I know how much you love 8K. I was going to ask, since it was a single camera, was it 8K? It
was an 8K streamed offsite with a 5G link.
What sort of bit rate was it, Dom?
It was 15 megabit, I think.
Nice.
And are you now an 8K believer, Dom?
Not for the viewer. for production, I have no problem with production. It's just as a mainstream distribution. I don't, the user is only looking at a subsection of that 8K at any one time. So.
Okay.
If they're watching it on a home screen or a mobile device, but what about large format display?
Well, it was only visible through very few players because anything else failed over to a standard, just a crop from the middle of it. So it was part of the experiment was to find out where people could actually watch the stream and what browsers were supported. And it was one of those things where it very quickly some of the player combinations and hardware combinations would give you the 360, but actually if you listen carefully, it was just giving you a binaural stereo sound. It wasn't giving you the spatial audio effect, so you can move the screen around, but the audio didn't move, for example, and so on. So we were trying to sort of get to the bottom of what the combinations were through the Facebook platform and beyond. But it was quite interesting. It was a good afternoon, and it was deeply immersive sound. It was quite incredible when it was working. it was like sitting in the middle of a ring of musicians.
And I think it begs the point to the fact that just because we can do it in acquisition doesn't mean that the end user can experience that. And do we run the risk of having some people able to experience it and others not? I mean,
I think the worst thing is the placebo effect. I'm not often shy of saying no, I can't hear it. But what was interesting is there were quite a few people feeding back that they could hear it that almost certainly couldn't hear the spatial audio effect. There's an interesting sort of placebo side to things, you know. So yeah. Anyway, interesting. That was worth mentioning.
You've muted, Tim.
Try that again. My brain was running between those two things. Let's see. So one of the other topics we had was Netflix raising prices, and you know, Disney raised prices recently. Is this because they have captive audiences that love the content so much they're willing to pay the higher price, or is it because they're seeing subscriber drops and therefore they need to charge the same price to keep putting out the same level of content?
It's an interesting question. Yeah. I think it's interesting that, I mean, I won't pay for Netflix anymore because there's the type of content that they're leaning heavily into doesn't interest me, pure and simple. So, you know, I have kids, so I have Disney Plus. I have, you know, interests, so I have Apple TV Plus, and a couple other, you know, streaming services. But Netflix, you know, there's only so many Hallmark-esque, you know, Christmas date movies you can watch. You know what I mean? I have no interest.
Does your recommendation engine show you?
That's so. That's exactly what I was going to say.
It's all they're producing.
I don't see any of that.
No, that's so funny. I think Dom's right. I think it's about the recommendation engine, because that is not what I would say I see on the home screen. I mean, there's enough of that, but I don't find that it predominates the platform. But at any rate.
Well, if it's not Elmo or Baby Shark, then it might. Right. Because it's not really Mark watching the content, it's the kids watching the content.
Yeah, my mom's over on occasion, so maybe that's where all the Hallmark movies are coming from. Who knows?
Well, and anecdotally, I've actually had a couple conversations with people whose family members have passed, their accounts have been shut off, and then Netflix has re-engaged the accounts. And it's strange. I actually saw an email where somebody had received that said, "Welcome back, so and so," which was a loved one who'd passed several years ago. So, you know, when I hear subscriber numbers now, I think about those anecdotes, and I think, boy, I wonder if we've really actually got a way to measure. Obviously, with the whole Nielsen being dinged in the last couple of weeks for, you know, having inaccurate counts, or at least based on some of the streaming providers saying that the counts are inaccurate. That's a whole another topic.
Do you know, I'm sure they could be quite accurate at their subscriber counts. Do you remember John, who we had on a few months ago? I remember sitting over his shoulder. He showed me an interface that he's got sort of through their internal, what do they call it? Wall sort of information layout. And they had this map, and I was watching the map, and alongside the sort of daylight evening terminator, there was lots and lots of sort of dots appearing in real time. And I was thinking, oh, is that people starting sessions? And he said, no, that's people signing up as subscribers.
Oh,
I was like, wow, that's amazing, man. So yeah, I'm sure they've got a long way to fall. I think Netflix is in an excellent position, and I differ from you, Mark. I've had Disney. We find a few things on Disney, and the kids like it, but actually, we as a family, we still are really deeply stuck to Netflix. We've been finding a lot of content for our family, and if anyone hasn't watched it, Money Heist is one of the finest pieces of TV ever put together.
Just my only question. I mean, when some of the other buzzy content services are $5, you know, and you're talking about something that's 4x that, is it worth it to most families, to most households, to pay that kind of premium for, you know, the same number of must-watch shows? You know, I mean, you could argue Ozark. What do you have? Squid Game. You have, you know, a few tentpole shows that they have. There's an equal number of shows on Apple TV Plus that I think people are talking about at the water cooler, so to speak. And it's a quarter of the cost.
I think it's human nature to want to not keep switching back and forth into the different platforms. So people land into a platform where they can get many different things. I probably landed in Netflix the most just because there's many different things in there, and rather than going to this platform and that right? It's like if people can land into a platform and there's a pretty good like range of things, I'm a documentary freak, then they'll probably stay in that platform and spend more time in it than move to another platform or go back and forth.
I would agree, yeah.
And I think it's interesting because we are talking apps that essentially people do see that difference. Like on TV in the old days, you flipped the channels and whatever was on those channels. And then of course, EPGs came along so you could flip through the EPG, but you didn't worry whether it was NBC or CBS or CNN or C-SPAN. And these days, it really does seem we've sort of come down to camps of, okay, I have Amazon Prime Video because I have an Amazon Prime account, but I have to think about paying for Netflix above and beyond that.
I think also this idea that the user will churn because they've got a bit bored of the content, they just hop around libraries, may be true for people who live on their own. But I think if you live in a shared household with a shared Netflix account or a shared Disney account, there's always someone that's halfway through some series and they don't want the service to be terminated. Right. And I think that just, in a house of four, that's just going to make it sticky. So,
exactly. And it's a good point here, Dom, right? Because I think right now we're probably in a bit of a dip in terms of content being released, right? After, lockdowns and all that. Yeah. So I think now is probably a crucial point for, those OTT providers to try and keep customers, paying, before more content is being released later in the year. If you look at, for example, the Disney schedules, there's a lot of content coming out, I think in the Q4 this year. And that's basically because of the inertia, the time it takes to create this content. So I think now is an interesting battle where there's not so much content being released and everyone basically fighting for subscribers.
What are you talking about content? What do you all think about sport? Do you think the culture around sport and sport broadcasting might have changed over the last 2 years because of people? I don't know. I get the impression that I never watch sport unless I'm producing something. It's just not something that engages me at all. But I know people who are avid fans buy seats in stadiums to go and watch their team or whatever, and people just seem to be not into it. It seems to have lost some of its sparkle by people having a bit of distance from it, I think. Well, and going back to spending hundreds of pounds on their TV subscriptions and their seats in football stadiums and all of this. I just wonder if actually that sort of collective think around sport and that collective experience might possibly be ripe for some change, actually.
Well, and Eric, before you sort of go on in that part of the conversation, let me throw a data point in, because with the state of streaming surveys that we do twice, annually now, I have noticed a trend in the last 3 surveys where we would see sport drop off as companies said, here's the service that here are the categories of service we provide as streaming platforms to our customers. And sport dropped off, houses of worship kicked in, and education kicked in much higher. At first, I thought it was a fluke, but I've continued to see that over the last.
Yeah, I wonder if people's priorities might have changed a little bit. But it might be a very.
I think if we think about sports and the pandemic, right, that was the one thing that was really hard to recreate. Like I was watching cornhole on ESPN because you can't get together and play a sport, right? So the past 2 years sort of represent what's happened with the pandemic, and it couldn't recreate itself like remote broadcast could. So I love American football, love it, right? Addicted to it. So this last NFL season was absolutely amazing. I think that picks the audience back up and brings them back into the fold. At the same time, in relation to streaming, it's very challenging when you're a cord cutter to find those broadcasts, those live broadcasts. So we use Sling, we use another live, it's like we buy the live thing, we use the live thing, and guess what? When the Super Bowl's done, I'm dropping that. I'm not going to continue on that subscription until the next cycle.
The relationship has changed too, isn't it? I mean, sports, watching sports the way it used to be, part of a set of live package you buy from, an operator, and maybe you flick through it. I think it has changed. And what we're starting to see now is people maybe even more engaged in sports, right? This idea that I can watch a lot of sports if I'm a sports fan, right? And we're having a very interesting conversation with some of the sports providers, because they do live events, but they don't do live channels, right? So they will have football when football is on, but it's not a linear channel that they normally broadcast over, over the traditional networks. Having said that, one interest and one thing they're trying to do now is basically build a linear channel with those live events built in and additional VODs or things that can be recommended to recreate the experience of a live channel. So it is an interesting, we're sort of looping back a little bit when, similar to Netflix, when Netflix introduced this live channel, I think it was in France, with a set of VOD assets put back to back. So you don't really have to look too far to find the content. You can just click the Netflix channel. Yeah, and I think that is interesting, right? Because sports has this, this need of being live right in front of you, this expectations, right? And with OTT, the fact that it's an event that has a start and an end, that sometimes I think leaves the audience a little, a little dry in terms of engagement, right?
So Xavier, that leads nicely into the whole conversation around BT Sport and Discovery. You mentioned DAZN. So just bring people up to speed on that, because obviously, being from the UK and being the person in the UK who watches sport as opposed to Dom who doesn't watch sport. Just sort of give us the details on that.
Yeah, so the big news was out today, earlier today. BT Sport was for sale, I think, for the best part of a year. BT decided to sell their content division for live sports, something they created a few years ago to compete with Sky. Sky is what I would say the traditional go-to outlet if you want to watch sports here in the UK. So this entity was for sale for a while. There were a lot of rumors around DAZN potentially buying the division from BT Sports, and at the end it is Discovery that has entered the last stretch. I think the news is the last stretch of conversation, exclusive discussions, and it is going to happen now with Discovery. So yeah, big news. I think it's likely to change the landscape here in the UK, in the sense that sports will be more streamed going forward. BT Sport was a hybrid proposition, streamed and also linear, with traditional transport stream delivery. You could buy, a Virgin subscription and get a BT Sports channel. I think going forward, it's going to move to more OTT, to more APR being delivered. So that's going to be interesting, right? That's going to put more challenges back into some of the networks, new experiences, some of the things we talked about earlier, more engaging. BT Sports has always been a trendsetter, I would say, when it comes to the UI, the experience, doing Atmos, for example, Dolby Atmos on live football games. Few broadcasters are doing this. So I think it's going to be interesting, right? It's going to be a big change, and definitely going in this trend of more consolidation when it comes to OTT. Disney also playing with live sports in North America. Seeing here DAZN, Discovery, Amazon Prime as well, buying a lot of the rights here in Europe as well. That's going to be it's going to be an interesting battleground, I think, going forward.
Well, and if I remember correctly, wasn't ESPN was in Europe for a while and then sort of pulled back, and obviously Eurosport has continued to do well. The fact that you have a US-based company buying a British sport company either says there's a massive appetite in the States for that, or it's a really good foothold to step in where ESPN couldn't necessarily get a foothold in Europe in the past.
Yeah, I think.
Go on, Xavier. No, you know something about sport. I think I've got some thoughts from the broadcast side, but finish. No, please.
It's interesting, right? Yeah, it's interesting because what we see basically is, I think, the European market, very quickly being overtaken by those big US brands who want to acquire the content, right? Prime has been acquiring a lot of the football rights. Recently, we saw them acquiring rights for the Ligue 1, in France, so the first Premier League in France, if you like. We saw them also battling with DAZN in a couple of the countries. DAZN has the rights, I think, for La Liga now with Telefonica in Spain. So we see a lot of those rights being snatched, and and it's interesting to see the dynamic. Like you said, the US company basically buying the rights here in the UK, maybe has an outpost to then do more across Europe. Obviously, I can't predict the future, right? But I think we're going to see more consolidation, right? The next question will be, who could be acquiring DAZN in a few years from now, right?
And I was just going to add, after spending 12 and a half years at Discovery, you know, they cut their teeth on Eurosport when they purchased them, and obviously doing the Olympic broadcasts for Europe over the past several years. And so they've been around. I think people don't necessarily consider Discovery sports. They don't think of that yet together. But if there's any company that can do it, it is them. They are scrappy and they want to win, and they will make it work. I have confidence.
Well, and living close to Knoxville, Tennessee, I've always been impressed with, just how scrappy those guys have been from the get-go.
So
For sure.
I just wanted to chip in a thought about the BT about that particular sale. So one of the things that really made BT Sport work was the tight connection between BT Sport as a production entity and as a rights managing, as a sort of point within the organisation to manage the rights, and their close natural group relationship with BT Open World, BT Broadband, all of the different levels of the infrastructure to actually bring together a true hybridization of IPTV and OTT TV to ensure that they could reach those tens of millions of viewers that wanted to watch the Premier League finals and the big rights that they watched, but over IP networks and so on. And that itself is quite a unique thing, and that's for a long time made BT extremely interesting because they have been a very full stack ex-PTT that runs IP access services, that runs all these different layers. I've always seen them as very far-sighted because they just went, let's do the full stack and do it properly, and they really, did something exemplary with BT Sport. But selling BT Sport and the rights and so on, it to me looks like Discovery, Pro and DAZN were fighting for not just the rights but the whole production workflow to sort of address those rights. And what really interests me is how they're going to disentangle BT Sport from BT Group networks over time, and to watch how Discovery moves that to Discovery networks so that it's truly on-prem with them, or whether they're just going to sidestep it and push it all into public cloud. Who knows about that infrastructure play? I think how that's going to play out now is going to be quite interesting.
Well, and we saw something similar in the States with Major League Baseball Advanced Media, which started as just for Major League, then became BAMTech, then took over NHL and several other things. Yeah. So that's you're right, that full stack, and in fact that hybrid model is what we're arguing in the webinar in about now an hour, is something that everybody needs to think about, because to Jill's point, to Xavier's point, consumers frankly don't care whose content they're watching as long as they can watch the content. They don't care if it's on one OVP platform or another. At the end of the day, if you have those choices and the choices all look similar, and there's a micropayment model perhaps that comes into play, then ultimately I think we will see consumers say, let me consume it the way I want to consume it without forcing me to have to do 20 different apps.
I just wonder where it's going to leave the PTTs and the big telcos. It's always got, it's not so. Part of the story is where BT Sport goes and what happens with that, but the other part of it is what does a big national telco do now? They have a particular network environment which allows you to scale to a country's scale, and it works. They've just got rid of a prime content driver. What do they do now?
Well, and AT&T, now that we're in earnings season here in the States with big companies, made the announcement the other day, as the whole Warner Media Discovery thing comes, to fruition, they're going to cut their dividend almost in half because of the fact that they're back to just being a telecom.
Telco, exactly. And the telcos look like they're sort of retreating back to just being carrier mode. And the application's gone out to these content providers. But
I think the pendulum is swinging, right? We used to basically bundle, content and telcos together. I think behind BT Sport, the idea is, you don't need to be a BT customer to get BT Sports. You can get it on Virgin. Even if you're a Sky customer, you can get BT Sport. So in a way, it probably makes sense to spin off the content division, because on its own, it's like an OTT provider. But once everything is shifting away from the telcos, the question becomes, how am I going to deliver all of this through my network, right? If everything is OTT, if you feel like I'm producing the cloud, I want to sell from the cloud, it is not going to work, right? You're not going to get, I don't know, 10 million streams when it's, the final of the football, the FA Cup in the UK, or, the Formula One. We had a good season of Formula One. Last year, a big event, millions of subscribers, they're not going to be streamed from the cloud. It is just not going to work, right? So this is where the telcos come back in. This is where the pendulum swings back, and the telcos have to build some infrastructure to help the OTT providers deliver the content, and then they can re-aggregate as well. I mean, there's an interesting conversation.
It's a big cycle coming. Yeah, no, there is an interesting churn coming, I think. Yeah.
Well, and I think that cycle also, at least stateside, involves ATSC 3.0 and the ability to deliver IP on a multicast level, because, you can't handle the scale on your ISP. That's fine. Turn your TV on. You can watch the same content being delivered across packets to your device. So.
And multicast has a lot to play here. I think, not being biased, right? With BroadPeak, I believed in multicast for a long time, and I think when you look at networks, doing a lot of unicast streams just doesn't make sense for live, right? You have to use multicast. We talk a lot about efficiency, quality. I mean, it gives you, reducing latency and all that. But I think also looking at the bigger picture, if you want to deliver really high volumes of streams, this is the way to do it. It's going to be a lot more efficient on the network. It's going to be also more efficient in terms of resources, cost, electricity. So going forward, I expect, the telcos to come back and say, look, if you want to do live on my network, whether you, DAZN, Prime, Discovery, this is the way to do it, where it works for me and it works for you and the customer, right?
So, Mark, you're out in the backyard of where the Super Bowl is going to happen. So clearly, sport is a big thing in California. I don't know if it's a big thing for you, but Xavier mentioned Formula One. I mentioned football. Do we get the sense on the West Coast, at least, that, okay, U.S. football is great, but I'd also like to watch international football, or NASCAR is great, but I also would like to watch Formula One. I mean, are we at a global sport consumption level? Cricket maybe hasn't kicked in the States, like it has in other parts of the world, but what's your general sense, from a California standpoint?
I think I think you mentioned the two, clearly non-American football, soccer, and F1 are huge. They're huge in the States, all over the States, and especially on the West Coast with F1. I think, cricket, rugby, there are certain sports that just haven't quite hit here. But I think we have reached, just in the past 5 years, really a global scale with regard to American sport consumption, just solely due to the OTT providers and the globalization of that type of content. You just didn't used to be able to get it before. I remember, when way back when I was out on tour with the Rolling Stones, one of my jobs as their IT/video guy was to set up a tent so that the band could watch F1 via satellite, because there was no option to do it otherwise. And that's, it's been almost as difficult to watch that content in the States until quite recently, especially the smaller races and things like that. So, I think now that we're in the age of the long tail and everyone's able to watch whatever they want to watch whenever they want to watch it, you're starting to see some actual fan base growing in the US, where we were really dedicated to US based sports until quite recently.
I remember as a kid watching, my dad was a soccer coach. I remember watching soccer on PBS, where it was the wide shot European, where you could see the players move around the field, but you had no idea where the ball was.
Right.
So Jill, you're a diehard NFL fan, as you mentioned. What about you, what do you sense around you in terms of global sport consumption?
I think, the more we have OTT devices, the more there's focus on individual companies. That's the great thing about all this creative space, right? Cycling, for one, cycling is something that's a hot sport that's now more available. So that's something that I think, as these sports that have sort of been not widely televised, or there's, cultures all over the place, but not a whole culture, I think those will come together more. I think cycling is a perfect example of that culture, where there's a lot of people that are doing it, and having that programming online will bring that culture together even more and make it stronger.
So Eric, is ice fishing a sport that's a sleeper sport since you're up in Wisconsin?
Near as I can tell, there is no demand yet for ice fishing shows on OTT, at least not live.
I'm on it.
Ice fishing's not great for watching live.
Yeah, but you
I'm
could at least, do a really high speed ice fishing where, every hour is
That's
equal
true.
to 45 seconds. And given the fact that you went to the Packers 49er game in the cold and experienced sport the way it's supposed to be experienced in
Right.
Wisconsin, unless it's hockey and then it's inside for some reason. What's your general sense though about global sport content? I mean, do people around you go, hey, F1's great, I really want to watch cars drive in non-circular patterns?
F1, and it's interesting. You talk about it, and Mark, you mentioned how big it is in California. It's certainly, I don't think F1 has caught on here quite yet, but it's only a matter of time, right? Just as with soccer/international football. The other global sport that really is huge that doesn't get talked about much is tennis. Tennis draws, people all over the world watching the Australian Open live at 3 a.m. our time. And yeah, obviously, OTT delivery just makes that experience more customizable and easier to share.
Now, so one question for everybody on here, Dom, you were talking about BT Sports sort of being ahead of the curve on it. Fubo was ahead of the curve with its idea of, essentially showing football all the time, not non-US football. Do companies run the risk of having that where they're too far ahead on some global sport, whether it's cricket or rugby or Australian rules football?
I think Fubo are finding their feet, actually. I think it's just taken them 3 years, and the investment community comes in and goes and wants to see, 100 million subscribers on day 2, and they're and then hard on everyone because the world isn't really like that. But it's too much. Yeah, I think Fubo are going great guns at the moment. They seem to be building their footprint, building their rights base, building their technology strategy. So yeah, I think there's. But what I don't know is whether the problem is. I think that a lot of sports is that the audience sizes are a legacy. The perceived audience sizes are a legacy from panel-based TV measurement. And I don't hold much truck with all of that. I think, what I don't see are many people saying we've got 17 million people tuning into this live event on our infrastructure. It's just not happening. So it's very diluted now and diverse. And I think it's hard to really tell. Although everyone says millions of people watch sport, it's not my experience in practice. I don't walk around town other than say at a World Cup final and feel the streets are quiet. And trust me, I walk around during British World Cup final because there's nothing less I like to watch than than football finals. It just does my head in. So walking the streets and realizing that, at an event like that, yeah, the streets go quiet. But generally, I don't know. Maybe I just don't live in a very football place. But the sense I've had is that people have kind of just slightly shifted in their passion for it over the last 18 months and gone, actually, there's other things to do and other things I want to spend the money on. So I'm not 100% convinced it's all growing. I think the market will always tell us that it is, because that's sport and it's very egocentric. And if you don't like football, you get a punch in the head. But in practice, I'm not sure it really is as big as it sort of portrays itself as being.
I wonder if whatever childhood trauma you experienced around football
I was going to ask the same question.
I ended up having to purposefully score own goals and run backwards over try lines and things to get out of teams because I was bigger than everyone else in my year and kept getting put in these damn teams. So I hated it.
Well, that would do it, Dom. Yeah, if you score on your own team, I imagine they get you out of there pretty quickly.
On purpose, and I promised I'd carry on doing it if they kept putting me in teams.
All right, so we're down to the last 9 minutes. Let's talk about hybrid events, because I think that's one of the topics that we had was, Zoom made an acquisition and is sort of putting its foot now into the hybrid event. And I think, Mark, you were interested in this topic, so I'll lead with you, and then I want to come back to what Eric had talked about with hybrid events around things like Content Delivery Summit.
First and foremost, I think it's been a long time coming. We've been, we're 2 years into this now. Zoom has been the de facto, fabric for many hybrid events. By far the biggest platform for that, over Skype or Teams or anything else that anyone's using, or homegrown WebRTC based stuff. And so for them to finally really lean into it with some cash and acquire a company that is focused solely on enabling their technology for professional broadcast, professional production, kind of tells the tale. I feel like they've embraced their role in the global events market and then the global production market, and the future is bright. What have you heard about Liminal? Are you familiar with their technology?
I'm not. Is anybody else on the panel?
Yeah, let me help here, because I've got it on my desktop at the moment. So here is a little bit of a high level. So basically, you end up with a little bridge tool sat on your laptop or your computer, to which you can write commands like this and drive Zoom basically. So it's kind of where the SDK gives you developer level, quite deep levels of developer interface, which they launched last year. This is exposing it in a much more simplified sort of scriptable way, so that you can start to write a scripted sequence of controls for how your Zoom runs and so on.
And there's a whole community of OSC based controls and devices and technologies and cloud platforms and things that will now interface directly with Zoom as a result of this, which kind of blows it open in terms of what you can do with a live production that happens to be on Zoom. And then I think maybe not quite as far-reaching, but a more immediately impactful technology is the Zoom ISO technology, which enables you to pull, HD feeds from each participant in a Zoom meeting and individual audio feeds from each participant in the Zoom meeting, and make them available to your broadcast infrastructure. I think that's huge, and unparalleled in the industry at this point.
Yeah, and we remember, I know, Mark, you and I have had the conversation around, like, when NewTek tried to do the Skype for Business as part of the, what did you call it, Talkcast, I think is what it was, whereas essentially it would have an SDI output. You're right, the fact that you can individually isolate people and put those into a broadcast feed allows you to sort of serve both your online audience and your traditional broadcast audience as well.
Exactly. I mean, 2 years ago, we built a studio in Marin County to counteract the fact that there was no solution for that. So we've got we've got the ability to bring in 16, people over Zoom, individual Zoom connections, so that we can ISO them. Now that type of infrastructure is no longer really necessary, because you'll be able to use Zoom ISO just to pull it all from the same meeting. Remains to be seen how the Zoom platform will stand up to that kind of load, because it doesn't substantially increase the load in terms of throughput and that sort of thing. So we'll see how it all goes under stress, but it's very exciting.
So Eric, from a practical standpoint with the hybrid event, how does streaming media see that type of thing going?
Well, I mean, that depends on how you're asking that question. How does streaming media as a publication that covers the industry see it going, or how do we see it for our own events? Because
how do you see it for your own events? And I'm not talking necessarily technical. I'm thinking more about how people interact with one another.
Well, and I have to back that up a little bit and talk about Information Today, which is our parent company. Information Today puts on about 8 events per year, from covering everything from database trends and management to knowledge management, CRM. They've got an event called Internet Librarian, which, as quaint as that sounds, is quite big. And then they've got streaming media. We're sort of the odd duck, right? As we are planning, as ITI is planning these events for the spring and going up through the end of May, one of the events, Computers and Libraries, is going to have to shift to virtual because they weren't able to get people interested in attending. Another event, Database Trends and Applications, is going great guns in terms of drawing registrations and sponsorships. Streaming media, it's yet to be seen. It's a little farther out. I do and I'm not representing my company here, right? But which is a weird thing to say.
You
But
can
you know,
if you want
I've
to.
I've got some reservations about whether or not the streaming audience will want to attend an in-person streaming media conference, which is a much smaller conference than, say, NAB, especially because our event happens just 1 month after NAB. You know, so as an event,
do you feel like our industry is less apt to cling to the physical event model because we're so kind of embedded in creating other types of events?
I do, although one of the things I've discovered planning this event, planning Streaming Media Connect, our virtual event in a couple of weeks, I've gotten the sense that people are getting tired of participating in these events as speakers. That it's become a little bit of an annoyance. Rather than the novelty is certainly worn off. I don't know whether that correlates with a desire to travel and meet in person. You know, Dom and I have these conversations. Well, all of us do, right? On SMAF and independently have these conversations about what in-person events need to be to draw people. And I just think it varies by industry. You know, different industries, different types of events. I was talking with Dom yesterday about some of the medical conferences, Tim, that you and I have talked about in the past, you know, which are, you know, it's surgeons going to Hawaii to spa and golf and maybe get a little content while they're there. You know, they punch their card to show that they've showed up at 3 sessions and they're free. It really varies from event to event. And so I think the whole event world is still in flux right now.
I will say, having been in video conferencing before streaming, 9/11, although it was shorter lived than the pandemic, we actually saw an upswing in people in the video conferencing world wanting to come together after they couldn't come together.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be interesting to see if this is the right year for the pent-up demand or if that moves to 2023. So.
But the technological conditions are, you know, vastly different now than they were in 2001. You know what I mean?
100% agreed.
I think.
But these were operators who would sit in a video conferencing room 8 hours a day to run the video conferencing for somebody else.
Right.
And apparently for them, that getting together, you know, became more important as video conferencing grew in importance across the board. So, all right, Dom, we are at the top of the hour.
We are, aren't we? Yeah, absolutely awesome edition. Thank you, Xavier. Thank you, Jill, so much for your input.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Hope you enjoyed it. It's a bit unusual to have the informal style.
and I'm sorry, I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of the things Jill is involved with is RISE, which is the Women in Broadcasting, very much like Women in Streaming Media. Jill's helping to launch the North American chapter for that. So kudos to you, Jill, and thank you very much for being willing to be mentors to women in the industry.
You bet. Anybody out there, you can reach out. And Tim, don't forget to bring in your lemon tree.
Thank you.
You beat me. You beat me.
Well, I think with that, Tim, we should say cheerio to the to each of the guests. So let me just spotlight you as you go around. So Xavier, thank you very much. Wonderful to see you, and
thank you.
In the fullness of time, online and offline, hopefully in due course. Jill, wonderful to meet you, and look forward to being in touch. And do reach out to the RISE community in particular. Let us know if you've got guests, because they're always very welcome over here. That'd be good. Let's keep hopping along. Eric, always good to see you. Good to see you back on SMAF a bit more, which is good. Gonna have to tell those events to stay hybrid so that you're available. It's a good thing.
Right.
And Mark, busy as always. I'm going to let you get back to being busy and looking after babies.
Good to be with you.
Nice one. And Tim, thank you for being MC as always.
Oh, absolutely. Always enjoy these conversations.
Cool. Well, we'll see you next month as we come to the March edition. Keep an eye on this space. I think we're going to drop LinkedIn for a while. That was a debacle at the beginning, so we'll have to tidy up the podcast. Thank you, LinkedIn, for creating an extra half an hour work for me. The podcast will be out over the next day or two, as will the audio archive. I'm playing weird gypsy breaks with jungle mashed up with drum and bass later, if you fancy some late night music on the Thursday night show. And with that, we'll see you next time.